Hello you lovely lot, my name is Max, welcome back to my YouTube channel where today we're going to be taking a look at the January transfer business conducted by my team, Nottingham Forest. As you will be well aware, the January transfer window ended last night on Monday and a lot of business was conducted by Nottingham Forest actually, surprisingly, considering doesn't seem to be a lot of money around the club at the moment, but some smart signings were made and some hefty wages were taken off the books by conducting some good business with other teams. So today I wanted to take a look at the players we've brought in, the players we've got rid of, how they profile, how their stats look, and what their impact on the team long term will be, of course, with the incomings, and how their departures will be felt long term in terms of the outcomings. I also want to talk about some of the rumours behind the scenes, considering some of the late January deadline day deals we actually went in for in the end. And I also want to spend some time talking about Brennan Johnson and Jed Spence, who of course were heavily linked with moves away from the club, but obviously were lured into staying until at least the end of the season for whatever reason, which we'll get into in a second. So before we do that, don't forget to hit the like button down below and subscribe to the channel whilst you're down there. It will be greatly appreciated if you want to see more of these real life stat dissection sort of videos, particularly around Nottingham Forest. I'm absolutely up for doing that, so you just gotta let me know in the comment section down below what you want to see. Well, that being said, let's crack into today's video and start talking about the January transfer window. Okay, so before we do that, I just want to caveat this with where I've got all my stats and all my data from. Predominantly, I've used FBref and Who Scored for collecting stats and analytics on players, Transfermarkt for transfer values and for transfer fees, and then I've also used Chris Kearney on Twitter, Forest Analytics. You may be familiar with him, he does some fantastic work, obviously, regarding Nottingham Forest, creating some visual data representation, which helps sort of understand the quality of a player and helping turn the quantity into a more visual representation. So yeah, highly suggest dropping him a follow on Twitter. He does some great work over there, not just with Forest, but also with some other players who have been linked to in the past. So highly suggest dropping a like down there. Okay then, with that being said, let's talk first about the players we actually managed to keep, because I think this is probably the most noteworthy, particularly with these two players I'm going to talk about. The first is, of course, Brennan Johnson. We recently rebuffed a club record fee from Brentford for the 20-year-old Welshman, who has had a fantastic start to his Nottingham Forest career. Obviously spent last season out on loan at Lincoln where they made the playoffs, and today this season has just seemed to have really sort of made his transition to the first team almost seamless, getting 7 goals and 6 assists in the process. Now, this club record fee from Brentford is believed to be in the 18 to 20 million pounds range. Of course, that is a hefty amount of money. It's also a club record selling fee from us. I believe the record fee we've sold for, I think, is still Ollie Burke. And speaking of which, I think it's a really good sign of intent that we have declined this bid. You know, I'm all for, reinvesting in the squad in terms of funds, but at this point in the season, in January, middle of the season, probably our best player this season being sold. Certainly the player who's had the most impact on the first team in terms of arrivals, someone who has helped really drive us up the league since the arrival of Steve Cooper, and what seems to be a late sort of push for the playoffs. I would suggest towards the back end of the season it would be a big hammer blow to our team, particularly as you'll see we haven't brought in another winger to replace him. Obviously, that would be a huge departure. So I'm glad that we've kept him in the squad. I do think it's a real sign of intent. Obviously, of course, we've got a history of selling our more valuable assets. We did it with Britt Sombolonga when Middlesbrough went up to the Premier League. We did it with Ollie Burke to RB Leipzig. We did it to Mikel Antonio, who obviously has flourished at West Ham, as you'll have seen in the Premier League. So yeah, I'm fantastically happy to see Brennan stay at the club. He's obviously a local lad. He's a youth product from the first team, going into the first team. His dad played for the club a few years ago as well, so it means a lot to us keeping him in there. The next player I wanted to talk about was, of course, Jed Spence. If you watched the Nottingham Forest Arsenal FA Cup match about a month ago, you'll have seen him absolutely tear Arsenal to shreds. He's a fantastic right back. And that is obviously exemplified in the business being conducted in January. Tottenham have had apparently 2 significant bids rejected by his parent club, Middlesbrough, for a permanent transfer. Arsenal, of course, who was also heavily linked with him as well, have had bids rejected supposedly. So it seems to be that the North London club seems to be vying for his signature at right back, and you can see why he's really flourished in a 3 at the back wing back system. This season he's scored and he's also set up a goal for one of his teammates, making 3.1 tackles and interceptions per 90 as well, and completing 1.5 dribbles in the process. And like I said, he really loves attacking that midfield and final third area, which is obviously fantastic for us. We do kind of lack a bit of sort of range in the wide areas, particularly at fullback, and have been heavily reliant on loans this season. And I think especially on the left hand side when we've had to play Jack Cole back out there, he's a lot less dynamic than Jed Spence. So it's really good to see him flourishing, I can't even say that word, really flourishing under Steve Cooper in that role. So of course these huge statements of intent have led to us keeping two of our most influential players down that right hand side in this team. But I now want to talk about some of the departures from the club, and I do think actually the trimming of the squad this season has actually been quite good. It does look like Dave Murphy's getting a lot more input in terms of the signings being made and also in terms of the squad building alongside Steve Cooper. There seems to be a lot more joint up thinking, which in recent years, if you've been following Forest, not really has been. Some really weird signings been made, and thankfully some of those players seem to be starting to leave the club now, as we'll get into in a second. First player I want to talk about is João Carvalho, still our record signing at £15 million from Benfica. I still cannot believe we paid that much for him, honestly. Obviously he's got an undisclosed fee, we don't know the actual fees, but he's gone to Olympiacos, our sort of sister club, obviously owned by the same owners as us, and he has had some really meaningful moments for the club. A couple of absolute worldies he scored. I can remember when I think he got against Reading during his first season, where he just like nutmegged two players, popped in the bottom corner. I feel like I'm remembering that correctly. It could be like the Mandela effect or something. But in his first season, he was probably at his most productive, getting 12 goal contributions, which was, I believe, 8 goals and 4 assists in 2,500 minutes, which is still a pretty hefty return. One contribution every 200 minutes or so from midfield is actually pretty good, like I say, from a midfield position. But he just sort of lacked fitness. He really lacked the intensity to play in championship football. He was a little bit lightweight, I think, for the league. And despite some loan sort of spells away from the club, always kind of found himself back into the first team picture as new managers came in, but slowly sort of fell by the wayside as they realised he wasn't quite up to the quality of the championship. And I think especially under Cooper, where we're not really playing a number 10 system, I don't really know where he would have played other than wide left maybe, in place of, I don't even know who'd be playing out there at the moment, but in that sort of wide left area, I suppose, probably be the only area we'd sort of find him at the moment. The next player is a loan departure. This is Lyle Taylor, the Montserratian forward, leaving the club on loan, joining Birmingham City about a week ago, I would say now, at time of recording. He was never really going to be the first choice at the club. Of course, Lewis Grabban, our captain, probably going to be starting over him the majority of the season, despite being like 35 years old at the moment. Absolutely smashing it in the league, by the way. Got like 12 goals so far this season. Lyle Taylor, again, not really ever going to get himself into the first team picture, especially with the signing of Keenan Davis on loan. And obviously we'll get into a couple more signings that we made later on the video. He just sort of seems to have dropped down the pecking order slightly. Did have some really important contributions for the club though. Scored some very important goals during his very brief spell with us after joining, I believe, from Charlton after they were in the Premier League, in the Championship last time out. And also scored against Derby on his debut for Birmingham. So all in all, I think that's a pretty decent deal for both sides there. I do like Lyle Taylor. I do think he's a quality player. And again, a bit like João Carvalho, I really hope he absolutely smashes it at Birmingham. Speaking of Arsenal, we've also got Jordi Osei-Tutu returning to Arsenal from his loan to us from the summer. I think he's subsequently gone to Rotherham, so hopefully he absolutely smashes it for them. He was injured for pretty much the entirety of his 6-month spell. Did get back into the first team towards the end of his loan period, and he does seem like a really talented young attacking fullback, obviously capable of playing further up the pitch as well. And I do think there is a future for him, maybe at Arsenal as a squad player, but certainly in the Championship. I thought he was all right when he was playing for us. He had a couple of appearances. Didn't seem too bad. He seemed off the pace, but I think you can definitely put that down to a pretty debilitating injury that he sustained at the beginning of the season. And with money quite tight at the moment, again, wages, I feel like I'm beating the drum at the moment talking about wages. With wages being a big issue for the club at the moment and financially not being in the best position, I do think it's going to be important for us to trim the fat off the squad, Jordi Osei-Tutu being a prime example of this. The final departure, as of the time of recording, of course more players could be released or whatever during February, was Rodrigo Alai. He did not play a single game for us. This was a very weird signing. The former Milan centre-back, the Brazilian of course, joined in the summer on a free transfer and didn't play a single game for us. And he tweeted subsequently after his departure saying that he wanted to focus on his health, and he seemed like he came across as a very professional player, came across very well every time he sort of had any interactions with the club. I just think it's definitely disappointing to see that he never really settled, never really got his opportunity. Again, he played for Milan, so he must have some quality, you would think. but unfortunately not quite at the level, I don't think, of being able to get into this Forest team. I think especially with quite a settled backline that we have at the moment with Worrell, McKenna and Cook, I don't think he was ever really in trouble of breaching those sort of back three that we have at the moment. And injuries, I think, as well played a part in his departure from the club. Okay, then, so we've talked about the departures from the club. We've talked about some of the business we've managed to avoid in the case of Brennan Johnson and Jed Spence. So I thought now we would talk about some of the additions to the squad, the ways in which we have bolstered our team over the course of the winter period, starting with Richie Laryea, joining for about $1 million Canadian dollars, about £850,000 from Toronto SC in the MLS. He predominantly plays as a right back, but he can also play further up the pitch or on the opposite side as a left back where he's got minutes for the Canadian outfit, completing around 2.4 dribbles per 90 with a 61% success rate. He also takes about 3 touches in the opposition's penalty area per 90 and actually scored 3 goals for the Canadian team last season in the MLS, and also contributes a decent amount defensively, 2.5 tackles and interceptions per 90 with a 70% success rate. He's not the strongest passer in the world. His volume of passes is pretty low. His progression from passes is also pretty low. He's definitely more of a driving on the ball kind of fullback, which is fine. It's definitely something a little bit different to what we have in the squad at the moment, but hopefully maybe under Cooper he can sort of improve his short game with his passing, hopefully. Next up is arguably our biggest signing, I would say, of the winter window, in the form of Steve Cook. The 30-year-old joins, of course, on a free transfer from Bournemouth, who of course have had experience playing in the Premier League, which is a great asset to have in our team at the moment. He's an experienced defender, capable of playing in both a back 4 and a back 3, which is ideal, of course, for Cooper, who is shown himself to be flexible in terms of formations this season. He slotted into the centre of our back 3 pretty seamlessly at the moment, alongside Worrell and McKenna, definitely being the experienced head that the two youngish centre-backs kind of need, someone sort of holding that defence together, making some important contributions. Had a pretty decent game against Derby, I remember a couple of weeks ago, although giving away a penalty in the late minutes of the game was very much instrumental in us being almost impossible to penetrate for Derby for 80-90% of that match. The stats I'm taking here are probably from his best season at Bournemouth. This was their 12th place finish during 2017-18, in which he was a very active defender for them. This is usually down to the very open system that was played under Eddie Howe. There wasn't a lot of defensive midfield coverage, so he was a very active defender in that process, completing 3.5 tackles and interceptions per 90 during that season, which is of course quite high for a centre-back. Again, you can attribute that to the very active defensive system that he needed to be in, with very little defensive coverage coming from that midfield. He's very direct with his passing, completing 3 progressive passes per 90 and 77% of his passes being completed over a 15 or more yard distance, which is a good sign that he's got a decent long passing range within him, but also is able to do the basic stuff as well, completing 10 clearances per 90 during that season as well. Overall, like the Richie Laryea deal, I consider this a pretty low risk deal. Obviously joining on a free is a big part of that, but of course his wages aren't going to be too huge as well, and at 30 years old he's still got 2 or 3 years, I would suggest, of decent defensive output left in him. Okay, then next up is our loan signing of Keenan Davis, joining from Aston Villa, where he's already scored 2 goals in his opening 4 league games for the club. He has only played around 250 minutes of senior football this season for both us and for Villa, so take the stats I'm about to read with a little bit of a pinch of salt. He's completing 3.5 dribbles per 90, taking 2.6 shots and creating 2.6 chances per 90. And of course this is very likely to come down over the course of the remainder of the season, but he has proven himself to be an absolute handful for defenders so far during his very limited time at Nottingham Forest. Best exemplified by his first goal for the club against Barnsley, where he was basically nicking it off a dawdling defender, running about 30 yards to take it into the box and coolly slotting it past the Barnsley goalkeeper. Okay, then we now have our 2 January deadline day signings made last night, the first of which is Jonathan Panzo. The 20-year-old centre-back joins from Ligue 2 side Dijon, and of course came through the Chelsea Academy and has been managed by Steve Cooper in the past at England youth international level. He's a left-footed centre-back who is comfortable on the ball, very press-resistant and decent passing out from the back. Obviously, the system we're trying to play under Cooper at the moment, which is something we actually quite like. McKenna and Worrell are decent enough on the ball, but aren't the best, and I think having someone a lot more comfortable on the ball will offer them some real competition at centre-back this season. Of course, being a left-footed centre-back who can play on the left-hand side of the defence and is really good on the ball is also an absolute gold dust sort of signing. Very few of those sorts of players around at the moment, particularly with a home homegrown player, which obviously adds to the quota, is fantastic. And I think a real smart signing there from Nottingham Forest there. Overall, I think this is a really good signing. It seems like a pretty low fee despite being undisclosed. Obviously has decent pedigree, having come from the Chelsea youth academy and having played youth football for England under Steve Cooper. So of course that sort of synergy between manager and player is fantastic. I do think it's probably one more for next season. I think with the back three being so settled at the moment, it's unlikely he's going to displace them too often this season. But I think being able to train with the first team and eventually sort of step up into first team duties next season could be the future for Jonathan Panzo. This is personally for me the best signing we've made on January, in the sort of January window. I'm a huge fan of Jonathan Panzo. Okay, then our final signing is the arrival of Sam Suraj from Stoke City. The 23-year-old joins on an undisclosed fee, which has been reported to be around £2 million. I feel like this signing was necessitated by an injury to Lewis Grabban, which is an ankle injury keeping him out for about 6 weeks from sort of now until sort of the middle of March, I would imagine, and seems to have been the main driving force, like I say, with the signing of Sam Suraj, likely probably to pay behind Keenan Davis in the pecking order for these next 6 weeks. That being said, he has got experience playing under Steve Cooper at England youth level, which is of course a huge asset to have. Seems to be a lot of the reasoning behind sort of signing a few of these players. We've seen it with Jonathan Panzo, not too sure with Keenan Davis, but it feels like he's probably more or less signed along those lines. That experience playing under Cooper, knowing what he expects from the team, and being able to play in that three at the back system, which is of course something that's not necessarily a given for a lot of players these days. Overall, he's not the most prolific player in the world. He's only scored 2 goals for Stoke City this season, was never really that prolific for Bournemouth beforehand. That being said though, he's a physical specimen, he's a big player, he's good in the air, and he's a decent link-up man as well. And especially if we're looking to be a bit more direct, particularly late on in games, he could definitely come on and make a real impact for the team, offering something different to the team that we maybe don't have necessarily at the moment. And like I say, with the deals for Jed Wallace and for Josh Bowler collapsing on the final day, Grabban's injury and Taylor's departure, we're only really left with one out-and-out striker at the moment. So having another striker come into the club, even if it's just for the rest of this season, is a real positive for the Coopers men. The final thing I kind of wanted to touch upon was these 2 collapse deals from the January window. The first was Josh Bowler and the second was Jed Wallace. We're going to talk about Jed Wallace first. He scored about 40 goals over the course of the last 4 seasons for Millwall, making over 200 appearances for the Championship side. And the 27-year-old's contract is up in the summer, so maybe don't be surprised if this sort of rears itself back up in the summer window. I would potentially maybe signing him on a free, or at least making another play for him in the summer. For me, Josh Bowler of the 2 is probably the most intriguing prospect. The 22-year-old departed Everton last summer, joining Blackpool, who've recently returned to the Championship. He scored 2 goals in about 28 appearances for the Tangerines this season, and really has profiled as quite an interesting player. Actually something we don't really have in our squad at the moment. That's how I can see why we're so interested in him at the moment. So I'm going to go through his stats. They're pretty interesting. Per 90, he completes 4.5 progressive carries, 4 dribbles, wins 2 fouls, and makes 1 pass into the penalty area. Now, for those more stat sort of aligned, that may sound like a familiar player. For me, he sounds really similar to like a Jack Grealish. A very good ball carrier into the final third, someone who carries the ball well, a bit languid, very tricky, obviously very heavily fouled player, able to pick up fouls and sort of niggly fouls here and there for free kicks and set pieces. And with what is quite a tall team at the moment at Nottingham Forest, playing for set pieces isn't necessarily a bad strategy, with quite a tall defence, decent tall midfielders, and obviously Keenan Davis and Sam Suraj leading the line, 2 very tall centre forwards. So to conclude, let's talk about the positives and the negatives of this window. Starting with the positives, of course, we got a decent amount of dead wood out of the club, but more does need to be done in the summer, particularly with that wage bill. We have been very smart in the loan market again, and of course Dave Murphy using his North American contacts well, particularly in that Richie Larea deal. And there now seems to be a very clear recruitment policy and a very clear joint up sort of school of thought in terms of the recruitment at the club at the moment. Clearly young players who've played under Cooper at young international level seems to be a positive as well in the case of Suraj, Keenan Davis and Jonathan Panzo as well. And finally, I think we've done really well to keep both Brennan Johnson and Jed Spence in the team for what's going to be a very late promotion push potentially during the back end of the season. I think the running's going to be particularly interesting and potentially finishing in a playoff position. And I think those 2 players will be pretty integral to it if we manage it. However, with the positives, there are always some negatives, and I think there were a few negatives, unfortunately, during this January transfer window. Not being able to get a deal over the line for either Wallace or Bowler, I think, is probably the biggest issue that we had. Definitely lacking in the wide department, particularly out and out wide players. And I think particularly Bowler, I think he would have been a great signing for us. I think he would have really absolutely flourished under Steve Cooper, a player who's got really good championship pedigree as well. In Jed Wallace, sorry, he would have been a great signing as well. I definitely think there still needs to be work done on trimming the squad down in terms of these sort of outside players who don't really play and sort of collecting 20-30k a week. These players need to get out of the club. We really need to trim down this wage budget, especially considering if we don't make promotion this season, we may end up regretting not selling Brennan Johnson whilst his value was at its highest. And of course, a pretty big issue is that we're still very reliant on loan players who, of course, as weeks and weeks progress and they have even better performances on top of even better performances, the likelihood of them staying with us beyond the summer decreases. I'm looking at the likes of Jed Spence, who's probably going to get a Premier League move next summer. Max Lowe, probably not going to stay at the club next summer. Keenan Davis started really well for the club. Can see him going back to Villa and smashing it in the Premier League. It's unlikely these players are going to be playing for us again next season, so we really need to make the most out of their value whilst they're in the team this season. So overall, I want to give this January transfer window for Nottingham Forest a B+. I think there's some great positives, but there definitely is some work to do in terms of trimming this squad down, reducing the amount of loans that we're making, and hopefully bringing in one of Bowler or Wallace in the summer. Let me know though what you think of the January transfer window for Nottingham Forest overall in the comment section down below. And whatever team you support, let me know who you've brought into the club. Who are you most excited for joining your club in the January transfer window? I'd love to see some conversation down the comment section down below. That wraps up though my January transfer review for Nottingham Forest. If you did enjoy it, please don't forget to drop a like down below and subscribe to the channel whilst you're down there. It will be greatly appreciated. We're nearly at 200 subscribers and I'm hoping to sort of diversify the content throughout 2022. With that being said though, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely day. I will catch you later.